Hi guys, so here we are. Can everyone see the PowerPoint?
Yes, we can see it. It's great.
Great, because I spent so much time getting this one ready. I'm so excited. Okay, so here we are. The whole purpose of life. What are you living for? It's a very important thing. People say to me they want to live a great life, a great, successful, joyful, meaningful, deep, sweet, beautiful life. And as we said before, not that many people know necessarily how to do that. So that's what we're trying to work on. First, we're thinking how to have a well thought out life. So in our first session, really our first two sessions, we said just like you invest time into researching, if you want to buy a new car, you research what's the best car out there, what fits your needs and your budget, and you talk to friends who have the car and you talk to people. Well, just like when you're going on a holiday, you're going to research where you're going and hotels and car rental and everything you do in your life that's important. You research it a little bit to work out, am I spending my time and my money and my effort in the right place? Is this what is worth putting time into? So we said your life is your most important thing. So how many people have spent a lot of time like working out, what is my life about? What am I meant to be investing in? So I came up with an analogy of a game. Every game you have a time limit. So football is 2 45-minute halves with a 15-minute break in the middle. And in that time, you have a goal, you have a purpose, and the purpose is score more goals than the other team. And there are rules and there are methods that you need to follow to be able to do this. And then there's a consequence of winning. You win a trophy or money or whatever it is, there's a consequence. So last week we said that there are many different ways to approach the purpose of life. There are some people who believe there is an actual intrinsic purpose to life given by God. God created the world with a purpose in mind, and he told us what the purpose is in a book. And people debate what's the right book. So those guys, to find out what the real purpose is, would have to really work out which one is the right book. Then there are people who say, no, there is no God. So how do we work out what we're meant to be doing? We can just use our human reason, our rationale, look at the human condition and see what's the best way to live. And we came to the conclusion last week that everyone, a Jew, a Christian, a Buddhist, an atheist, everyone would agree that the basic general purpose of life is twofold. Number one, become the best person you can become the most righteous person you can become, and make the world a better place. You're improving yourself and you're improving the world. The question then becomes, how do you do that? Because a Buddhist's idea of how you become the best you is very different to a Christian's idea, and a Republican's view is very different to a Democrat's view. So how do we know you've got the right view? So we got 3 questions to work out, to have a well thought out life. Number 1, what do I believe? Number 2, why do I believe that? And we said usually you just believe things because of your society or your parents or your education. Somehow you believe those things. And number 3 is, how do you know you're right? So then I went through briefly a few of the other... did someone ask you a question? I briefly went through a few of the other paths. So we looked at Christianity, and we looked at Islam, and we looked at Hinduism, and we looked at Buddhism to see what they teach. And today what we're going to do is we're going to look into, what does Judaism teach? What are the core foundational beliefs of Judaism? What's the game? What's the Jewish game? Judaism 101, the game of life. This is a philosophical and Kabbalistic overview of existence, just in case you wanted to know. It's very important. I grew up traditionally Jewish. I had a bar mitzvah and I played in a Jewish football team, and I never ate pig. But I didn't really connect to Judaism, and I found out later, now that I have, because I didn't really understand what Judaism teaches. I teach at the moment in the mornings, and I'm doing a course called A Journey Through the Siddur, going through the prayer book. And there's a guy who comes to some of my classes about personal development and spirituality, but he doesn't come to that class. So I said to him, well, why don't you come to the Siddur class? And he said, because it's not for me. I don't like praying. I don't like the Siddur. So I said to him, well, what do you know about the Siddur? What do you know about praying? He goes, it's the words that the rabbis wrote. I actually said to him, it's the opposite. If you don't like praying and you don't like the Siddur, then you should come to a Siddur class, because maybe you'll find out what it is and what you're missing. And maybe once you understand what the Siddur is actually trying to do, then you would actually like it. So what we've got to work out is, what do we believe? And this is what Judaism believes. And then we're going to discuss in today's class what our foundational core beliefs are, and also in next week's class. And then we're going to talk about, well, how do we know that that's right? Why do we actually believe that? So let's move straight into the game, friends. Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. This is the key, core, foundation, declaration, war cry of the Jewish people. We say it the last thing before we go to bed. We teach this as the first thing to our children. People say this as the last thing just before they die. It's really our foundational core belief. So we have to understand what it means. Just very quickly, one of my favorite Shema stories is that after the Holocaust, one of an American rabbi, Rav Eliezer Silver, he went to Europe and he went to lots of orphanages. And he wanted to go and collect the Jewish children, because lots of the kids had been placed in orphanages to escape the Nazis. They went to some orphanages and he said, I want to come and I want to take all the Jewish kids with me. And they said, look, we don't have records, proper records. And if you don't have records of who's Jewish, we're not going to just let you take children, which is fair enough. So he came up with a plan and he said, I've got a sign. I'm going to give you a special sign. And if when I do something, any children do this sign, that's going to prove that they're Jewish, and then you'll let me have them. So they agreed. So he came back at bedtime, 8 o'clock at night, whenever it was, and he went into the dormitory rooms, and all the kids were getting ready for bed, and he'd walk up and down the dormitory room saying, Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. And they noticed that lots of the kids would put their hands over their eyes. So, because that's what I do with my children every night before they go to sleep. We say the Shema together, put our hands over our eyes, say the Shema. So these kids, obviously, when they were 2 and 3 years old, that's really what they remembered. And let's work out, what does the Shema really mean? And from that way, we're going to work out what we believe. So Shema Yisrael. Listen, Israel. Hear this. And by the way, hearing is different to seeing. Seeing is you just get the whole picture immediately. Whereas hearing is more integrating. You hear sound by sound. When I'm talking to you, there's one word, then the next word. And we really need to integrate this knowledge. It says, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad, which means God. There is this is one name of God, and another name of God, and the first name of God again. So what our first and foundational belief is that there is a God. There is a creator of all existence. Now, some people believe that this is what God looks like. There you go, there's God. If an atheist says to me, Rabbi, I don't believe in God, I say to the atheist, Baruch Hashem, the God that you don't believe in, I also don't believe in. We don't believe that God is an angry man in the sky and he's got a list of rules. And if I don't do his rules, he'll punish me in hell forever. And he's got a white beard and probably a British accent. So we don't believe in that God. So what do we really believe God is? So here it is. We saw it in the first God name in the Shema is Yud and Hey and Vav and Hey. You'll be amazed to know that nowhere in the whole Torah does it say the word God. It says this word. This is the main word for God, Yud and Hey and Vav and Hey. What does that even mean? So here we go. It spells out 3 words. Haya means was, Ove means is, and Yihye means will be. Was, is, and will be. God to us is the first existence that always was, is, and always will be. God is everything that's ever existed. God's everything that exists now. And God is everything that always will exist. So I'm going to use the word Hashem from now on, because I don't like the word God so much. Hashem just means the name. So when speaking about Hashem, these are the general terms that people use. And I'm going to talk a bit later about how accurate these terms are. But infinite, eternal, and perfect. This is the core definition of what God is. Infinite, eternal, and perfect. Who knows what eternal means? I don't know what eternal means. I'll tell you, unless someone wants to tell me. Eternal means going on forever and ever and ever and ever in time. But Judaism actually teaches that God created time. So God isn't really eternal. God's much more than eternal. God created time. So he's beyond time. For now, we have to use words. I'm going to tell you why soon. But we have to use words, for example, eternal. And infinite means going on forever and ever and ever and ever in space. And God created space. God was there before time and space. Time and space only come around once you have a physical entity. So God was before physicality. God created the universe. So God's beyond that, but we say infinite and eternal. And if you're infinite and eternal, it means you can't be lacking in any way. There can be no lacking in you, because if you were lacking in some way, then you wouldn't be considered infinite. So we say God is perfect as well. Now, as I just said, God is really beyond time and space. So God is transcendent. There's another philosophy called pantheism, and pantheism means that everything, the whole universe is God. The universe is God. Everything we see put together is a unified, that is what God is. Judaism says that's not the case. God created the universe and is beyond the universe, so God is transcendent. So great. There's no angry man in the sky. There is the foundation of all existence. So Rambam, Maimonides, in 1135, that's what it looks like. He said the first mitzvah is that we are commanded to acquire a knowledge of the nature of God's existence, i.e., understand that he is the original cause and source of all existence who brings all creations into being, which means that God himself wasn't created. We know that the universe and ourselves is finite. It had a beginning, the Big Bang. In fact, the Torah starts with in the beginning, Bereshit, in the beginning. And only recently, this last century, they found out that indeed there was a beginning at some point. Especially some Greek philosophers said that the universe itself is eternal. We discovered at the beginning of the 20th century, at the end of the 1900s, that no, there actually was a beginning. Once we had the Hubble telescope, which could look back all the way in time, we know that there's a beginning, and so there's a cause. Now, if whatever caused the universe was itself finite, then we'd have to ask, well, what caused that? Until it will go back until we need an original cause. So God is the original cause that was never created. He was never created. He didn't have any creational cause because he's not a physical being. God's not a physical being, so it doesn't need a creation, not a cause. The second word for God in the Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu. What's Eloheinu? Really, it comes from the word Elohim, which means God created the world, and so it's not separate. The world isn't separate from God. Once, before there was the universe, there was just God, not a physical being. And then God, at some point, created the world. So once again, I spoke to an atheist the other day, and we agreed that there is indeed the Big Bang. So there was a Big Bang, and so I said to him, well, how did the Big Bang come about? And he said there was a very, very small piece of gas, and then the gas, some kind of chemical reaction happened, and the gas started the universe. So I said to him, so where did that first piece of gas come from? Because matter can't create itself. Gas can't create itself. So where did the gas come from? And he wasn't quite sure about that answer. So we say, no, there was a first cause. So he creates the world. Now the world cannot be separate from God. It can't be that there's God. And he created the world outside of himself, because if the world was outside of him, then he wouldn't be called infinite. You can't have infinite and something outside of infinite. So this is what Moshe Cordovero, who's a very famous Kabbalist living in Sfat, he says basically on the commentary to the Zohar. The Zohar is the core textbook and source book of Kabbalah, of Jewish mysticism. So he says the essence of divinity is found in every single thing. Nothing but it exists. Don't attribute duality to Hashem. Realize rather that Hashem exists in everything. Do not say this is a stone and not Hashem. Rather, all existence is a part of Hashem, and the stone is a thing pervaded by divinity. So everything you see around you, all of the physical world, according to Kabbalistic teachings, is actually just a part of Hashem. It's a physical manifestation of Hashem. It's not separate at all. God is actually often called Hamakom, the place. God is the place, and everything is in God. Some people say God is in the world, which is true. Also, the world is in God. So we say ultimately God is transcendent, above everything, and within everything. Maimonides himself said the second mitzvah is that we are commanded to acquire the knowledge of the nature of God's unity. Understand the original creator and source of all existence is one. The Rambam says that. And it says in the Torah, Ein od milvado. Should have a vav at the end of that. Ein od milvado means there is nothing apart from God. Everything in existence is just a manifestation of God. You can't say there's anything separate. So if we look at this line again, we have Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, means, listen, you've got the Yud and the Hey and the Vav and the Hey, the God beyond nature. And you've got the Eloheinu, Elokim, the God within nature. And really there aren't two gods. There's not a God that's above and a God that's below and a God that's spiritual and a God that's physical. Really, Hashem Echad, it's just one thing. One thing, Hashem is everything in existence. By the way, what does that mean that we are? We're going to get onto this. But if God is everything, then we can't be separate from God. We are also a piece of God. We are a piece of God. Who here feels like a piece of God? You've got to feel like a piece of God. You can never have low self-esteem again. Because if anyone puts you down, you can just say, hold on, but I'm a piece of God. And you're a piece of God too. All right, we're going to move swiftly on. Here's a very important idea that I touched on just a few moments ago. There's something called mitzido and mitzidenu. Mitzido means from God's perspective, and mitzidenu means from our perspective. From God's perspective and from our perspective. So mitzido, from God's perspective, we can never know, because we're finite beings and we can never really understand infinite. So God has his whole view of everything. So what we do in our life is called mitzidenu. It's how we can relate to God and perceive God. It says in the Zohar, Leis machshava tfisa b'klal. No thought can grasp what God really is. I don't know if any of you have read the Tao Te Ching. It's the source book of Taoist philosophy, written by Lao Tzu. So he says there that the Tao that can be spoken of isn't the real Tao. Whatever you can say, any words that I'm about to tell you about God, it's not really talking about his essence. So here, this is what Rav Moshe Chaim Luzzatto, he was a famous Kabbalist, he lived in Italy and died in Israel. in his book, Derech Hashem, The Ways of God, which if anyone's really interested in this topic, you must get yourself a copy of this book. It's the source book of Jewish Kabbalistic philosophy of the whole purpose of creation. In his book, he says it's necessary to know Hashem's true nature cannot be understood at all by any being other than himself. We can't really grasp what infinity is. If that's the case, what on earth are we doing here? How do we know what we're meant to be doing? So, what happened was, God, this is what our sages teach us, God wrote a book. God wrote a book called the Torah. He dictated the book to Moses. And he wrote it in a way that we can understand and relate to him on our level. And this is really called anthropomorphism. It means giving God qualities of a human being, not because he has them, but just because if we don't have that, then we have no way to relate to God. So for example, it says in the Torah, a strong right hand. God took us out of Egypt with a strong right hand. Who here thinks God had a strong right hand or has one? God doesn't have a strong right hand. But we understand what it means to have a strong right hand. Our right, for many people, our right is our stronger hand, and we use that for protecting people and hugging people. And it says also that God gets angry. Does God really get angry? I don't think so. God doesn't have anger, especially because negative character traits show a lacking in some way. It actually says God is compassionate. And in our prayers on Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, we call God Avinu Malkeinu, our Father and our King. Our Father. Is God really a Father and is God really a King? No, not at all. However, Hashem himself says you have to use these words because it's the best you've got. So that's called mitzidenu. From our side, from our viewpoint, this is how we're going to start to try and a finite being like us and relate to an infinite being like Hashem. So really that's the main point of the Torah, is just to give us this way to be able to relate and connect. I'm going through this bit quite quickly so we can get on to, this is the philosophical underpinning, so we can get on to the amazing PowerPoint that I made for the purpose of life. Here we go, the purpose of creation. What on earth are we here for? Or what are we here for on earth? What are we here for? Why were we created? At first there was God, and God was just unified on his own, and suddenly there was a creation. So why? What are we meant to be doing here? There's a word in Hebrew, lama. Lama, I don't know if anyone speaks Hebrew, but lama can mean two things. It can mean why, and it can mean what for. Lama, to what end? So for example, why did Ford create a car? Why did he invent the car? Now, what for is to get from A to B in a comfortable and fast way. Why did he create it? Is because he was bored, or because his mum told him to get a job, or he wanted to impress his girlfriend, or he wanted money. What was the motivating factor? And what for is, so what's the purpose? So we're taught that we can't necessarily ask the question why for Hashem. Why did God create it? Because we can't say he was bored, we can't say he needed it, and we can't say his mum was telling him to do something with his life. Come on, God, do something with your life. And so he created. But we can certainly see what was the reason for creation. We're going to go back to Derech Hashem. And this is what Derech Hashem says. Hashem's purpose in creation was to bestow his good to another. Bring into existence a creature who could derive pleasure from Hashem's goodness. So this is the best we can understand. Let's say that God is perfect. So perfect means doesn't lack anything. And when we think of something perfect, we say the good character traits. God is loving, and God is compassionate, and God is kind, and God is giving. So it happens to be that if you're on your own and you're loving and kind and compassionate and giving, but there's no one to love or give to or be compassionate to, then you're not being able to fully manifest yourself. So for God, once again, I'm just talking so to speak, how we can understand it in our human grasp. So God was there and he couldn't fully manifest himself, as it were. By the way, calling God he and him and himself is also, God is not a man as opposed to a woman. I'll talk later about why we refer to God as a he, but we're going to say he for now. So what Hashem did was, he wants to bestow his goodness to another, and therefore he needed to create another. He needed to create an entity, obviously not separate from him, because nothing can be separate, but something that he could give good to, and someone who could get pleasure. So here we go. Now we're into I had such fun making this. So there's a concept called Nahama de Kisufa, or Lechem Shalbusha. So here we go. This, my friends, believe it or not, is a picture of Hashem. It's not really what Hashem looks like. This is called, before creation, there's just infinite godliness. There's a famous story about, there was a little girl, 4-year-old girl, and she was drawing a picture in her kindergarten, in her gan, and the teacher said, what are you drawing? And the girl said, I'm drawing a picture of Hashem. And the teacher said, hold on, no one knows what Hashem looks like. And she said, they will do once I finish drawing my picture. So let's say this is Hashem. So Hashem says, right, I want to bestow my goodness on another. So what he did is, because how can you have a piece of something infinite? Something's infinite and unified, it can't be split out into pieces, but it can. This is how. And there you go. So Hashem took a little piece of himself. You see, within that circle, there is Hashem. And outside the circle, there's also Hashem. And really, it's all one. So for example, you got all the air in the room. Here's all the air in my room. So how can you have a piece of the air? Air's a non-countable noun. You can't say there are one air, 2 pieces of air, 3 pieces of air. But if I make a circle with my hand, then there is air within the circle, and there is air outside of the circle too. So you can say that there is something that's not separate but distinct. So now there's another thing in creation, and this thing in creation is going to help Hashem manifest himself and become self-aware. So this is not what a soul looks like, but there you go. There's a soul. It's not what it really looks like. So now we have souls. Hashem created souls in order to give goodness. So now the soul is reveling in heaven, in God bliss consciousness, really lying in a spiritual jacuzzi with a margarita and champagne maybe, and just enjoying godliness. And God is bestowing his goodness, and the greatest good there is to have a deep, authentic relationship with God himself. So that's what's going on. And in steps this idea of Nahama de Kisufa, or Lechem Shalbusha. And what this means is, literally in English, it means the bread of shame. What does this mean? Now let me think of an example. Let's say you're 35 years old and your parents are paying your rent. Now how does that feel? The answer is, it actually feels quite nice because you're getting your rent paid and you're staying in a nice place. But it doesn't feel that great because you feel a bit embarrassed. You feel embarrassed, you're 35 years old and your parents are paying your rent. So receiving a free gift doesn't give you the greatest pleasure. It certainly gives you some pleasure. If someone buys you a car, you really love and appreciate the car and it's great. If you worked overtime for a year to save enough money to buy your own car, then you appreciate it much more. Then you get the greatest pleasure. So Hashem wants to give the greatest pleasure. However, we're in a situation where we can't receive the greatest pleasure because if it's a free gift and you haven't worked for it, then you feel a bit embarrassed. Lechem Shalbusha. So Hashem says the way that this soul is going to have the ultimate pleasure is if it works for it. And the only way it can do that is if it gets put down away from its completely spiritual state. We've got to get this spiritual soul and put it into a space where it has to work for the relationship with God. At the moment, it's just a free, natural relationship with God. Now it's got to work for it. So what did he do? Bam! The Big Bang. Creation. Here comes physical reality, the universe. Hashem created the universe as a training ground for the soul. And this is what happens. The only way the soul can survive on Earth is if it has a spacesuit. And the spacesuit is, there you go, your body. Spacesuit is your body. So just like for us to go and stand on the moon, we need a spacesuit to survive. So too, the soul can't be on the earth if it doesn't have a body. So Hashem puts the soul in the body. When that happens exactly, is it 40 days before the child's born? Is it the day the child's born? There are different ideas. But the soul comes down into the body in order to earn closeness and earn the relationship with Hashem. By the way, we know that the main name of Hashem that we spoke about before is Yud and Hey and Vav and Hey, and we can see in this diagram how that really actually forms the human body. So according to our Kabbalistic masters, everything in the physical world is just a representation of something in the spiritual world. So the human body in the human form, it is literally the soul being a piece of God is manifest in the body. So and here we go. Can you still identify as being a soul? Can you still connect to God and godliness when you're put in the middle of Times Square? This is the picture of reality. I'm going to put this spiritual entity called a soul, and I'm going to bam it into the middle of Times Square with everything going on and physical world and pressures and all things going on. And your goal, this is the game. The game is you've got 100 years to connect to and identifying being a soul and being godly. And that's really, really not easy. So this is who you are, by the way. You're sitting there in Germany or Israel or Toronto, and this is who you are. Really, your core essence, who you are, there you go, you're a soul. I sometimes say to groups, who here believes you have a soul? Everyone puts their hand up, or hopefully. And I say, well, you're actually wrong. You don't have a soul. You are a soul. You are a soul, and you have a body. So there you go. The soul's been put into the body. Now, as soon as you have a body, it's very difficult because you have physical drives. You need to sleep. You get tired and you need to sleep. And you need to eat. And you have other physical desires. You want to procreate. And these really can override your spiritual essence. You just want to stay in bed and eat a lot, and the taste is so nice. You have all these desires that kind of pull you down in a way. Once again, one of the things I very much appreciate about Judaism is that we never say that the body is a negative thing. We never say physical pleasure is a negative thing, just as long as you're doing it in a right and conscious way. In the East, they teach that you have to get completely away from physicality. Go and sit in the cave, don't get married, fast a lot. If you want to be spiritual, just get away from the physical world and your body, and they do all sorts of affliction on their bodies. In the West, it's the opposite. It's eat all you like, sleep with who you like, smoke what you like, sleep as much as you can. And it seems to be, these are big generalizations. Judaism doesn't say that. Judaism says you can have physical pleasure, but just A, in moderation, and B, at the right time, in the right way, with the right person, with the right thoughts and the right intentions. So as long as you're doing your physical things from a godly, from a soul level, that's okay. As soon as you've got a body, you're already very much cut off from your spiritual essence. Added to that, you've been given character traits. Now, your good character traits are connected to your soul. So your kindness and your perseverance, that's all soul-like character traits. But we have other character traits like jealousy, anger, hatred, fear, low self-esteem, whatever it is. And really, these are manifest in thoughts and emotions. So we have something called the Yetzer Hara. The Yetzer Hara is our negative mind patterns. So I said to a group the other day, if you had a friend who spoke to you how you often speak to yourself, how long would you let them be your friend? And the answer is probably not very long. After about 20 seconds, you'd punch them in the face. Because we have this negative mind patterns that judges ourselves and judges everyone else and judges the world. And it's very difficult. Not only that, we've got all external stuff. For example, we have to make money. And we have pressure from our parents to do certain things. And the physical world itself doesn't necessarily reveal godliness. Has anyone seen God today? Where is Hashem? I can see my couch and my guitar and my books, but I can't see Hashem. So we've been put in this incredibly difficult situation, which is we have to connect to God, connect to Hashem, which is really ourselves. We need to connect to ourselves and identify ourselves as a spiritual entity, a soul, even though it's almost impossible to do so because we have a body and desires and negative character traits and negative thoughts and emotions and all external stuff, and we're being dragged down so much into the world. And the world God is so covered up here that there are even quite intelligent people who say that God doesn't exist. That's how covered up God is. So this is the game, my friends. Can you connect and identify with being a soul, even though it's very, very, very difficult to do that in this circumstance? And this is how you're going to earn. So it won't be lechem de bouche, it won't be the bread of shame. It will be bread. It will be a spiritual pleasure that you worked for and you earned it. Because if you can be a spiritual being, even in such a physical world, then you've really become a master. I'm just going to quickly go into the soul. Our sages teach us that the soul itself, you have 5 levels of the soul. First and highest level of the soul is called Yechida. We can't talk about it so much, to be fair. It's just pure godliness. As I said, we're connected, we're not separate from God. Then the second level of your soul is called Chaya. Now, Chaya is our collective Jewish soul. Our sages teach us that all the Jewish people together, we come from the same source, the same soul root. So it's like the sun. The sun is the source, and then there are sun rays. And each individual sun rays are different souls, different Jewish souls, but we all go back to coming from the same soul. Those 2 levels of the soul are very high and esoteric and aren't really connected to your body so much. We have 3 lower levels of the soul that really make up your identity as a soul, who you are. Amazing that we can go into these Kabbalistic ideas with you, but some people say you can only start learning Kabbalah when you're 40. I just turned 40, by the way. So I can, but really nowadays, everyone needs to learn these basic ideas just to get a grasp on what's going. So many Jews look into Eastern religions and mysticism and philosophies because they're not being fed it through the Torah and through our way. So it's very important for us to learn this stuff. So the main level of your soul is called neshama. Your neshama is really your individual piece of pure godliness. We say every morning, Elokai neshama shenatata bi tohorahi. Your soul, your neshama is completely pure. It's a pure piece of God. It's called a chilek Eloka mimal mamash. It's really literally a piece of God. And there's nothing you can do to damage that, by the way. You can't damage your soul. Now, the next lower level of your soul is called the ruach. Now, the ruach is your emotions and your thoughts. And it's really your personality. Your ruach is who you are in these 100 years. It's who you're being in these 100 years. And the final is your nefesh. And your nefesh is more of an animal soul. It's called your animal soul. The neshama is called your godly soul. And your nefesh is called your animal soul. And it's just the enlivening force. An animal actually has a nefesh. An animal doesn't have a neshama. It has a ruach to a certain extent. It has a personality. It doesn't have a neshama, but it has a nefesh, which is survival instinct, eating, sleeping, procreating. So these are the levels of your soul. Now, our sages teach us that our life is a constant struggle between the neshama and the nefesh. We are this middle level called ruach, and your neshama is that positive driving force. We call it your yetzer tov, the inclination towards doing good. So the yetzer tov is always putting positive thoughts in your mind. Don't judge yourself, don't judge other people, get out of bed. And your nefesh is pulling you down all the time. And it's called the yetzer hara. It's an inclination to do negative things and physical things. Once again, physicality isn't all bad as long as you're doing it from a place of your neshama. So physical intimacy between a husband and wife at the right time in the right way, that is a very soulful physicality. Eating food, checking that it's kosher first, making a bracha on it, sharing words of wisdom whilst you're eating, saying a bracha afterwards, it makes the physical act of eating become a soul, a neshama type eating. But the nefesh is other things, driving you towards staying in bed when you are meant to get out of bed and go for a run, driving you towards eating more chocolate cake than you know you should eat, driving you towards think bad things about yourself and bad things about others. So our life is this constant battle between basically the body and the soul, which fits into the picture that we've just drawn. You've been put into a soul, you've been put into a body and told you have to identify with your soul and not with the negative force called your nefesh. The Midrash, rabbinic legend, and teachers of Kabbalah tell us actually that your yetzer hara, your negative side, is actually your best friend. In the creation story, it says God created on the first day and he saw that it was good. God created on the second day, he saw it was good. Third day, fourth day, fifth day. On the sixth day, God created man and then he saw it was very good, tov me'od. And our sages teach us that tov me'od, me'od means your yetzer hara, this negative side, which is crazy. Who would have thought that? But what they teach us is, it's very good because it's your sparring partner, it's your training partner. If you don't have anything to fight and overcome, then you can't become a master. I play lots of tennis, not so much anymore. I used to play a lot of tennis. You don't want to play someone who's not good. You're not going to grow and improve. You need an equal and opposite force in order for you to grow. So, Pirkei Avot, Ethics of Our Fathers, says, Ezehu Gibor, who is a master, who is a strong person, Hakovesh et Yitzro, the person who overcomes and controls and refocuses their negative side. So this negative side is serving an amazing purpose because it's by overcoming it that you become a real master. So this is what your life on the world, on this planet is. There you go. Yeah. Literally, this is a cartoon, a popular cartoon, but this is literally what your life is. You have your soul telling you to be soulful and do good soul things. And you have your negative side saying, no, think bad things, feel bad things, do bad things, say bad things. It stops you from being great. It pushes you towards being not so great. And your purpose, the game is feed the soul side. Listen to the soul, identify with the soul as much as you can and feed it. Do everything you can to make that the strong force. And ignore the other side or control the other side or use the passion, the fiery passion of the other side to put it towards a good thing. This is your life. And to the extent you do that, that's what's your soul's reward will be when you die. So this is what happens. You got your soul, comes down into Times Square, comes down into the world, and that's what's going on for you. You've got these two forces. You've got the soul is speaking to you and saying, you're a soul, don't forget you're a soul. And the negative side is saying, no, there's no soul, there's no God, just eat, sleep. Once again, Judaism has a beautiful balance because your soul also says to you, you have to work in the world, you have to have a job. You can be a lawyer and a doctor, you're Jewish, you have to be a lawyer and a doctor. You can be a lawyer and a doctor, but as long as you're doing it from a place of integrity and you're helping people, you have to go and build orphanages. Don't escape from the world. You have to be in the world, but just be in the world as a soul. That's what you're trying to be, a soul in a body. And to the extent that you do that, when you die, when the body comes to an end, you're going to go back up, and there you go. And you're going to be this pure, shining neshama soul back away from the physical world, in a spiritual world, but now really being able to receive the full goodness because you worked for it and you earned it, and you don't have any feeling of shame or of embarrassment. So based on who you were in this world, that's the reward for all eternity, they actually say. That you're gonna enjoy the bliss for all eternity. Now thank God. Sages teach us that Kol Yisrael yesh lechem chelek be'olam haba. Every single Jewish person, and really every Jew and non-Jew who is good and has improved themselves, will be in heaven. So don't worry about it. You're going to get there. It's just how much are you going to appreciate it when you get there? And you're going to appreciate it to the extent that you built yourself as a vessel to be able to receive the godly the blessing. So the more you identified as being a soul, even when it was difficult, that's how much you built yourself and your consciousness to be able to receive the reward at the end of days. So I came up with an analogy. It's like you go to an amazing play and you're sitting outside and it's a beautiful summer's day and there's a breeze and there's nice music before the play and there's all the food you like and it's really wonderful, and then the play starts. And everyone's very excited the play starts, and it's all in Chinese. So you're going to enjoy it. Of course you'll enjoy it. It's nice there, it's nice weather, and you've got nice food, and it's fun, and you're with your friends. You're not going to get so much out of it because you don't speak Chinese. You don't get the full experience. Had you spent your whole last 3 years learning Chinese, the more Chinese you know, the more you'll get out of the play. And so this is really my analogy for life. The more Chinese you learn here, and when I say Chinese, that is the more you connect to being a spiritual being, a soul, whilst you're in the world, the more you're going to understand and enjoy heaven. Once again, we're all going to be in heaven. It's going to be nice weather and nice food or whatever. We're all going to feel the pleasure of being in heaven. Just some people are going to get the experience more than others. Very quickly, the Mesilas Yesharim, also written by the Ramchal, the Moshe Chaim Luzzatto, speaks this out. He says this like this. Our sages of blessed memory have taught us the man was created for the sole purpose of rejoicing in God and deriving pleasure from the splendor of his presence. For this is true joy and the greatest pleasure that can be found. So really, you were only created to get the highest amount of pleasure and bliss, which is connecting to Hashem. The place where this joy may truly be derived is in the world to come. It's not even on this world. And the world to come, heaven, whatever that means, is not a place. Heaven is specifically created just to give you good. However, the path to the object of our desires is this world. As our sages have said in Pirkei Avot, the world is like a corridor to the world to come. So we've been put into this world. This is the game. You've got 100 years of walking through the corridor and preparing yourself and training. And the amount that you train, I don't know if you've seen Rocky IV. Rocky IV is that training scene in the mountains, in the snow, and he's carrying the log. So the amount he trains, that's how he's going to perform when he gets into the ring with Drago at the end. So this world, you weren't created for this world. So if we're chasing after money and women and cars and honor and physical pleasure, and that's what we're living for, and that's what we're chasing for, and that's what we define as success, we're missing the point, because that's not what this world is about. In fact, that stuff is a distraction. That is exactly the distraction making you identify as a physical being. Once again, we have the balance, which is you can be very rich, and have a nice house, and have nice clothes, but don't define yourself by your wealth, and don't get your self-esteem based on your wealth. Use your wealth to set up charities and lots of mitzvahs. You need to be rich. You need to have lots of guests for Shabbat. You need money to give charity. You need money. So we don't say money or this world is a bad thing. Unlike some religions which say completely renounce the world, no money, no. Judaism says no, you should and can be involved and immersed in the world, but just from kind of above it, not controlled by it, just using it as your tool to become spiritual. So how do you actually do this? And I'm going to finish on this. How am I meant to always live as a soul when I've got a physical body and I've got all these pressures? So we say that you need the instruction manuals, you need the guidebook, because you're not going to be able to do this on your own. And that's why the ultimate creator being of all existence, just like the person who created a washing machine wrote the instruction manuals, so too Hashem wrote the instruction manuals. The word Torah actually means instructions. It comes from the word Hora'ah. It's the guidebook. Hashem says the purpose of life in this world is to be spiritual, connect to your soul. And you can only do that if you have a guidebook, and this is how you do it. The Torah is full of mitzvot. And a mitzvah, the 613 mitzvahs, a mitzvah isn't a commandment, oh, I'll punish you if you don't do the things that I command you. It really is related to the word tzavta, which is a connection, a binding point. These are mitzvahs are the ways you connect to being a soul. This is how you connect to being a soul. This is what your soul food is. This is what it wants to do. The soul wants to put on tefillin. The soul wants to keep Shabbat. In fact, the Zohar calls the mitzvahs actually pieces of advice. Pieces of advice is Hashem saying to you, look, here's my advice to you. This is how you're going to do it. If you don't do it, are you a bad person? Not at all. You're not bad at all. You just didn't take the advice. You're not considered evil or bad. If someone doesn't keep Shabbat, that doesn't make them a bad person at all. I know people who keep Shabbat and they're not very nice people, and I know people who don't keep Shabbat and they're the most wonderful people in the world. So it's not a value judgment. If you eat not kosher, it's not a judgment on your character traits. It just means that you're not following the pieces of advice. So the Torah says some certain things. If you want to connect to being a soul, you can't eat pig, because for whatever spiritual mechanism, pig is blocking you from connecting to being a soul. And you need to light Shabbos candles, not to appease God, but because that's helping you become a soul. But this is the guidebook, the advice book. Now what we have to do is ask ourselves, well, how do I know it's the right one? And this is my third question, is how do I know that it's true? It's great. I love your story. It's a beautiful idea, purpose of creation, but I don't know that this is the correct guidebook. In fact, there are some things in it that I don't really agree with and I don't really like at all. There are a few strange things. So how do I know that this is actually the book that God gave? Because a very, very small percentage of the world's population, less than 0.1% of the world's population, believe that this is even the guidebook. I'm just going to quickly read in the Mesilas Yesharim. It says, the means which lead a man to the goal are the mitzvahs, which we were commanded, and the place of the performance in the mitzvahs in this world. Therefore, we were placed in this world so that by these means we'd be able to reach the place which has been prepared for us, heaven, the world to come. And there we'll enjoy the rewards. It says today for the mitzvahs. We're going to do mitzvahs today, and then we'll receive the reward tomorrow, later, afterwards. Pirkei Avot itself says, but you can't do it just because you want to receive the reward. You've got to do it because you know it's the right thing. You can't be living your life just because you want to get reward. That's too egotistical. We have to have this right balance. So that is basically the makeup of existence, that's the game as taught by our philosophical and Kabbalistic masters. You're here to live a godly, divine, holy existence and connect to yourself as a soul and come as close to Hashem as we possibly can. What does that mean? We're going to find out next week. The guidebook. Next week, we're going to ask ourselves, what does the guidebook say? We're going to look into the Torah and see what it tells us. We're going to look into a few other core Jewish beliefs. Like, what does it mean to be a Jew? Who is Jewish? Who's not Jewish? Do we believe in reincarnation? What's the Messiah? We'll look into a few core Jewish beliefs. And then the week after that, I'm going to start delving into the question, how do I know that this is true? And it may be a nice philosophy, but how do I actually know it's true? I'm going to see you next week. If you have any questions, you can either ask me now, or you can email me at dovber@justified.org. Guten Abend. Are you going to hang around if there are any questions, suggestions, complaints, donations, jokes, or recipes? Or if anyone wants to say how amazing the PowerPoint was.
Well, we just had here a recipe for a purposeful life. Bit of a recipe. Thank you, Dov Ber.
Thank you. Dankeschön.
Anybody else? We can also read thoughts, but we prefer speech. Anybody wants to say something?
Yeah, let's have your questions. Let's clarify. Anyone needs to clarify anything?
Am I speaking? Can you hear me?
Pardon?
I don't know how this... Is this working? I don't know how this app works.
It works. Just speak a bit louder.
Okay. Am I loud? I don't want to speak
loud.
too
Yeah,
loud.
I'm going to turn my volume up. Okay. Ready.
Hi. Thank you for the class. Question. If we're like able to say with certainty that God doesn't get angry, this is just something that we say to like understand an attribute of God or to relate to God, right? Like saying God is angry is like saying God has a hand. So how do we know for certain that God is the opposite of angry, that God is loving and God is compassionate? Like, wouldn't God therefore just be void of like all characteristics?
Excellent. So really, I defined mitzido and mitzidenu. From God's perspective, he doesn't have these things. But from our perspective, he does have these character traits. Even though his core essence doesn't, the way he works with the world is with these character traits. Therefore, if we can say, why do we say that God isn't really angry? It's because having anger shows some sort of lacking. You're lacking even for a human in some ways. If he's angry or jealous or fearful or aggressive, it shows that he's lacking in some certain way. And we know that what we call a tzaddik, a perfect human being, a righteous human being, doesn't have negative character traits. All the more so, a perfect being wouldn't have those negative character traits. So we can't associate those with him. Whereas a tzaddik, a perfectly righteous human being, has positive character traits like being loving and being kind. So we can only look at our world we have, see what a perfect human being in our world is, therefore project that, as it were, onto Hashem, which Hashem himself says you need to do that. Because otherwise you won't be able to connect to me at all.
But isn't there a sort of perspective that says that God doesn't really get involved in our lives? Is that something that's...
There is, but that's not a Jewish perspective. There's a philosophy called deism, which is God created the world, but doesn't get involved. But Judaism says, in fact, the first of the 10 Commandments is Anochi Hashem Elokecha, Shehatzeiticha me'eretz Mitzrayim. I am the Lord your God who took you out of the land of Egypt. Many people ask the question, why does it say that? Why didn't it say, I am the Lord your God who created the whole of existence? which seems like a much greater thing to be. Look, God, I did everything, but he's saying, no, I'm the Lord your God who took you out of Egypt. I'm like, great, you did a couple of miracles, the river turned to blood, and you did some hail, and that's not half as impressive as creating all of existence. And the answer given is that it shows that God is personally involved and cares, and we have a relationship with God. So even though creation itself may have been a greater achievement for God, by the way, if you're infinite, one thing isn't harder than another thing. God could have just created the world with saying, let there be the world. But Judaism teaches no, God is intimately involved in our lives all the time. Now, your next question would have to be, okay, so how do you know you're right? Because a deist says that God's not involved, and an atheist says there is no God, and a Christian says God's involved in this way. So we have to ask ourselves, great, so I know what you believe now, but how do you know you're right? And the answer to that question is always going to be, what is the evidence? Which one has the most evidence? And Judaism doesn't believe in blind faith. I believe what I believe based on strong, rational, empirical, scientific, philosophical evidence. That's where my belief comes from. And we're going to go through the evidence together, and then hopefully start living our life in accordance to whichever path has the most rational evidence. Be'ezrat Hashem.
Thank you.
I love questions. If anyone's got more questions, even if you don't want to ask now, you can email me. And I'm going to be in Berlin for Shabbat this week. Anyone who's in Berlin, come and meet me for Shabbat. And anyone who's not, come to my house in Jerusalem for Shabbat the week afterwards. All right. I will see you next week when we delve further into the mysteries of existence.
Toda rabba. Thank you. Danke schön.
Thank you very much. See you next week in Berlin.
See you next week.
Thank you.
I'll send every one of you a recording, whoever I have the email from, so that you can join next time again and see and watch over and over and over and over and over again. Macht's gut. All the best.
Bye bye.
Be well.